Dashus, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this very special fireside chat on one of the most defining intersections of our time, AI, energy, and the economic engine. Today we stand at a critical inflection point where technology, sustainability, and human values must converge.
As you would know, Bhutan is known generally for, of course, GNH, environmental conservation. This has been our anchor in a lot of ways. Hydropower, tourism, agriculture has been the definition of our economy, if you generally see Bhutan. In the 90s, with the telecom revolution and the internet revolution, I think, did we leverage that enough? But now with the AI revolution, if I may say, and especially in the last 5 years, and with Bhutan having a potential of about 36 gigawatt of hydropower potential, a lot of solar potential. How do you see, Bhutan as a small country leveraging this momentum, growth in AI globally, in terms of energy, in terms of leveraging AI and an economic revolution and an economic diversification for Bhutan? Maybe we can start with you, Reid.
We could actually spend the entire hour on the first question, but we won't. I think there's a couple things to think about in terms of the intersection of energy and AI. I do think that one of the kind of a general framing to understand everything that's going on is that intelligence will be widely, and I'll unpack the sentence, but intelligence will be widely available at the price of electricity. And what I mean by that is whether it's a tutor or a teacher, we're in a school, a medical assistant, a coding assistant, a researcher, all of these things are already present in some of these AI bots, and they're getting better kind of month by month. And what you can predict will happen if you just kind of see where it's going is that there will be a broad-based availability to whatever the kind of human interest will be, which is the reason why there's going to be such an incredible increase in demand for power, because it's not just the question of how you train these models, but the theory that intelligence becomes kind of available in the way that, oxygen, water is, because electricity is broadly available, is a real transformation of human society. I think that part of the, and by the way, the hunt for many gigawatts, and like, for example, 36 gigawatts is a great number, but in the hyperscalers, they're all looking for where do you get 50, 100, 200. I mean, it's a kind of projecting into the future. Now, part of the thing that is actually where Bhutan is exceptionally well positioned is that all of the kind of US hyperscaler companies have made public commitments about green energy. And part of what's important when we get to this intelligence revolution by which, intelligence is available to help us, to help amplify humanity at the running of electricity prices, which is the reason why we anticipate a huge demand in what we geeks call inference as well as training. The global grid, certainly the US, but most of it is well behind on sustainable energy of substantial size. And so I think Bhutan has a natural kind of edge there that could be very useful, and frankly, both of your neighbors have declared that they want to be leaders in AI, and so we'll have huge need for this sort of power. Now, one thing I wanted to kind of dispel about some of the sometimes thinking about AI and energy that I think is useful for everyone to understand is they think, well, is the demand just going up in a way that it's kind of like there's a lot of electricity use without a lot of benefit? And the reason, of course, that meme starts is that when you're training these AI models, it takes these massive computers with months of time, with many gigawatts of energy, depending on what you're doing. And you say, well, okay, that was training the model. I didn't see any particular, I didn't see any students being educated. I didn't see any, healthcare outcomes. I didn't see any, and a lot of that. So that looks like you're just paying a large upfront cost. And so there's a frequent discussion about is it going to be just a massive energy user? And I think there's three things that people are not, and by the way, some of that's true because you have to pre-train these models in order for them to provide this intelligence everywhere, anywhere, all the time, and cheaply available services. Part of the things, one is the hyperscalers are willing to go to great lengths to engage with clean, green, scalable energy because it's part of their commitment. That's something that obviously Bhutan can leverage and benefit from. Two is that already AI intelligence, when it's applied to things, tries to make them better. And so, for example, already a decade ago, DeepMind of Google, and Google, by the way, thinks it has its the most efficiently run data centers in the world. It's credible. As a board member of Microsoft, I don't know if I'm allowed to endorse that, but it is they're very, very good at what they do, and so but when they applied the decade-old techniques of AI, they got 15% efficiency within the data center, and you begin to think about what does that mean applying to grids, applying to homes, applying to use. That once you have intelligence, it actually should be applied, should be reducing or making efficient consumption in various ways.
That's one question. Just,
I did have a third point, but I'll come
it's
back
a clarification question because you said the big tech and hyperscalers' commitment to sustainable energy, but I want to just get that unpacked because my understanding was that with the needs, clearly green energy is not going to meet the needs, and with your buddy Trump in office. He's not buddies, I'm just kidding. The American adherence to promises around green energy seem to be diminishing in value. So, and you don't have to speak about this with their Microsoft board member hat, but just in general, it feels like the commitment to green energy is diminishing, and it's just cheap energy is what people seem to be going for. And you see coal plants, and I guess nuclear is clean, but putting my Bhutan hat on, are people willing to pay a premium for green energy to train AI or not? And what do you think about just the commitment? It doesn't have, yeah.
Good question. Most of the hyperscalers are willing to pay a premium. And so they take their commitment seriously, and even though the political winds are changing, part of the reason why, I can speak authoritatively for Microsoft, I've also been in conversations with Google and others, is to say that, they are also kind of viewing how do you have a very positive human, positive planet, future world. And that's part of the reason they made the commitments. They didn't feel that it was a commitment because they were forced to. They felt it was a commitment because it was the right thing to do. And now, there's not, within the global economic system, there's not things at any price. It's some kind of premium. Where the premium plays out is a question that we will iterate on over the future. But I think the answer is yes. Now, I think there are some of the hyperscalers that care less and only care about, kind of the dollar cost, their bottom line. That's something we have to navigate as a society. And obviously, I'm not going to be calling any of them out. But I think there is some. But for Microsoft, Google, and others, I think there is a very strong commitment. The third one, which I then will end this first volley of question with, but to go in deeper, is that the part of the thing that we're seeing when you begin to think about intelligence everywhere is the acceleration of all of the areas that we really care about where intelligence is applied to the tasks we do. And so, for example, I think science is going to be accelerated. I think science is part of the reason why I did, along with Siddhartha Mukherjee, Manas AI for accelerating drug discovery for curing cancer. I think that's one. But also, by the way, I think, for example, energy researchers, whether it's in, nuclear fission or fusion and other things, there's going to be an acceleration of intelligence capabilities everywhere. And it's one of the things where, of the last 2 years, a lot of the frontier models, those are the largest ones being built by the most advanced players, are working on accelerating science. And some of that should play back to the energy world too. And so I just wanted to, it's kind of common to think, is AI a negative on energy? And I actually think it'll ultimately be a positive, even with slower development of kind of the, kind of how many, given the intensity of the curve of gigawatts, you both have, for example, in China, a lot of building of nuclear plants and a continued deployment of coal plants, right? Because they're just going for as much energy as possible. But for example, everyone who is smart about the environment knows that, coal plants not good. We should be getting green as aggressively as we can.
Just to follow through, I think Joi mentioned, the demand of AI and impact on pricing, and particularly for green energy. There's a separate, thinking on particularly AI and the possibility of becoming the global dominant force. AI will bring you supremacy, and therefore the race towards training the foundational model. Maybe a question to both Joi and Reid. How much of a factor is that going to influence, the demand for going for any type of energy, irrespective of whether it's green or whether it's polluting?
Just to rephrase, because of the winner-take-all race condition of foundation models and China and US and others competing, will they just forget sustainability and just go for the win, right?
That's probably one of those questions.
Was that the main question? I mean, do you want to take a shot? I mean, well, I mean, yeah. So I think, again, I think it connects to Reid's previous answer. I think it puts a lot of stress onto people who are thinking longer term, and I think and I'd love to hear Reid's view on this, but the amount of energy the sort of geopolitical race condition has fluctuates a little bit, but I think it continues to be pretty high. And I think that the focus of it shifts as each new technology comes out. So I think when DeepSeek came out of China, there were some really interesting things because all of the researchers were China educated. So clearly the Chinese already have the capability to train them. They were using slightly old GPUs that were kind of pretty well engineered by the researchers. So the export restrictions clearly don't work as well. And then with President Trump, I think a couple weeks ago, pulled back on the export restrictions that President Biden had put in. So for example, for Bhutan specifically, I was struggling last year talking to various people to try to get high-end GPUs to Bhutan to do foundation model training. But now, and it was difficult because there was an export restriction, but now it looks like there won't be. So GPUs seems to be less of a bottleneck. So the bottleneck shifts, and then you see the Chinese now getting hardware that may eventually end up competing. So the foci changes and the time scale changes, because I think the Americans thought they had several years of a lead on China about a year ago. Now they don't think that. So that sort of accelerates or decelerates. And I think, to me, it's just pressure on the thing that Reid was saying, which is people trying to do better for more people in the long run versus I need to win this thing. And I don't know where we are, but I think it's a really good question. I don't know where you think we are.
Well, I think it's a +1 to that. I think that on one hand, I think that, for example, there's never a slackening of what the interest and demand for green energy is. However, there's also an intense demand for energy right now. And so a little bit of it, if push comes to shove and you say, well, this 20 gigawatt availability on green energy will be available in 3 years, they'll say, great, we'll buy it for 3 years from now, and we're going to go get something else for right now. And that's how I think with the pressure. It's not so much that, then we don't care about green energy, as much as there will also be, because of the race dynamic, an intense demand for energy right now.
Right. Just following up that, I'll come back to Reid for a 30,000 feet on the energy discussion. But Joi, you've been with GMC, you've been with GIDC, you've been with Bhutan. You have seen the progress, the economy, the vision of GMC, of His Majesty, and the whole country behind it. connecting to your book, Whiplash, pull over push and risk over safety. For Bhutan to, as Reid mentioned, hyperscalers are hungry for energy now. How do you see we should work on our policies and regulations to move ahead on accelerated investment in energy and in other areas and in talent development and in bringing opportunities so that we can meet the opportunities of the hyperscalers for now and also the future? So some kind of interaction between the global happening and what we can do in Bhutan.
Thanks. So let me describe, risk over safety sounds bad, so let me explain that one first. So everything has risk, and Japanese always try to build things that have no risk. But I've always found the things that are said to have no risk have the most risks because it just means you're unaware of the risk. And venture capital is all about, you see a thing, and if you understand the risk better than anyone else, you can actually pay a little bit more for that thing because you can measure the risk and you can manage the risk. And for people who invest, what you do is you find a company that's doing something in a field that you understand or a person that you trust, so you can trust the thing a little bit more than everyone else, so you can pay a little bit more. And as the company grows and it becomes famous and it becomes successful and it's in the newspaper and it's going public, we say the information is in the price so that people are now all buying it because they're excited because they think there's no risk, but you are aware that there is still some risk. So at some point, the price of the stock is actually higher than what it should be given the risk, and so you sell. So a good venture capitalist buys low and sells high. That's how you make money. Japanese investors typically buy high and sell low. So they buy the Rockefeller Center at the peak, and they go bankrupt and everything, and it's almost worth nothing. They're like, okay, we'll sell. Or Pebble Beach is the same. They bought it for as expensive as they can, and they sell it for the least. And so most people try to buy things that have no risk, and they sell them when they become risky, which is buy high, sell low. And so this is like a fundamental theory of investing, is everything has risk. You have to understand the risk, and if you see that the cost is lower than the risk, you sell, and if it's lower than the risk, you buy, and if it's higher than the risk, you sell. But when you apply that to sort of everyday life, you always have to kind of assume that you have risk, and you have to take the risk given and understand the risk. But if you understand the risk and it's the right risk to take, it actually has more upside than downside. That's just kind of a sort of mathematics of risk taking. And so a lot of institutions are all just trying to eliminate risk. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand risk and take risks. And then when it's overvalued, you might think about setting it up. So that's kind of on risk taking. And then pull over push is interesting. There's a book called The Power of Pull by John Seeley Brown, and it's a really interesting idea. So traditionally, big institutions, what they do is like, and armies and things, they stock everything, and they get everything they need, and then they go. Or like if you're a hierarchy, you get everything you need, and then you push down. But like Japanese auto companies during the war and stuff like that, they couldn't afford to stock everything. So they started just pulling things as they needed. This is lean manufacturing. And you pull things from the network when you need it, and then you go. And if you're like friends, what you do is you have a lot of friends that know everything. Instead of you trying to understand everything, you just know where to get the information, and you get the freshest information that you can when you need it, and you keep running. And so pull is very much agile. And so a lot of government institutions, they want to get everything ready, eliminate all the risk, and then start. But what you really want to do is you want to understand the risks, start small, take risks, learn, and then keep pulling from the network only as much as you need. So don't try to raise $100 billion and then start GMC. Get 10 million here, get 1 million there, learn something, try a prototype, and then always keep pulling the best people from the network as you need them. And then for people, it's also kind of the same. Instead of building an army of 10,000 people that can do the thing, start with one person, and then find another person, and find another person, keep iterating. And this works we learned this kind of in software, right? But it actually works generally for places like GMC. And I think we're lucky because Bhutan is poor. Because if we had the money that Saudi Arabia had, we would be so big and so risk adverse that it would just be this kind of bureaucracy from the beginning. But I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to pull the best people in, find the most interesting projects, take some risk and learn, and build the network as we go. And I think sort of by design, we're hopefully going to end up with the best of class in each category. And so it's kind of counterintuitive, and for entrepreneurs, it's very common. But I think His Majesty is actually very entrepreneurial, and he sort of embodies this idea of pull over push. And I just see him on WhatsApp saying, okay, we need this person, and he has the access to be able to pull things when he needs them. He doesn't need all of the consultants always here. He can just ping the smartest person in each category as he needs it. And so I think it's a method that we're using. And it's hard for people who come from kind of more structured top-down systems to understand, but I think it's working well so far, at least.
Right. Please.
So, Joi, I think we've set the context of risk, and there is no situation where there is no risk. I think I'd like to pull in Reid right now. In your recent book, Super Agency, you talk about how technology, gives society the possibility of super agency, and specifically, AI is the next thing. I think it would be very interesting for this group to understand the impact and the wide coverage of AI and the opportunity of super agency. If you could elaborate. Yeah.
So I gestured at this a little bit at the beginning, but part of when new fundamental technologies are introduced, a very human response is to worry that this reduces human agency. It does change societies, and part of the change of society is its, agency shifts. And so when most people may not track, but when the printing press was invented, the discourse around the printing press was very much like a lot of the discourse around AI. It'll destroy human capability because memory is so important and you don't have to remember things. It'll destroy the channels of authority of information, because the authority of information used to be, monasteries and various kind of religious institutions, and now anyone can publish a book. I mean, who knows where that would lead? And so that discourse is very similar, and we're of course having it right now with AI, and of course it's a very substantive change, because I think that within let's call it 5 years, if you're doing work with language, which almost all work involves some language. So for example, even if you're kind of running a kind of a store or agriculture, you're still doing financial analysis, you're still doing sales, you're still doing meetings, there's language all over the place. Any work task that involves language, if you're not using one or more AI co-pilots, you're probably under-tooled. And that's within 5 years. And so that's the kind of the wave of the change. Now, what happens, because it's a change of agency, everyone starts by worrying that this is a reduction of agency. But when you look at this, it's a transformation of agency, and you usually get much more agency on the other side. Now, it doesn't mean that it's like you had your previous agency and now it's just add, because, for example, take the introduction of the automobile. When the automobile was introduced, there were a lot of people who made their livings around horses. And actually, I don't know what happens with Bhutan these days, but horses, horses and carriage, et cetera, et cetera. And with the automobile, basically all of that industry completely transformed. And so if your agency was, I'm a horse groomer, like all of a sudden there were a lot less horse groomers, horse raisers, et cetera, because it was less more. You say, oh, that's a reduction of agency. But then when you look at what happens when everyone has cars, and part of the concept of super agency is not just that you get a superpower, that Joi gets a superpower, that Ujjwal gets a superpower, that Jigme gets a superpower. It's a question of other people having those superpowers too helps you. So take the medical circumstance. So you have a car, your child, your family member has an illness. You can get to the hospital. You can get to the doctor. You can get there in a much more easy way. That the speed and ability to do that. But part of it is also because the doctor has a superpower of being able to come to you. Say, for example, you can't move your grandparent, your child, et cetera, well, the doctor can come to you. So you are gaining agency from the doctor's superpower of having the car and being able to get to you. And the same thing is true when it comes to AI, because part of the question around this is to say, not only do you benefit from being able to talk to, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, et cetera, about, what your medical issue might be, but so can your doctor. And part of when you begin to get to thinking about what the future is, almost for sure, you might be somewhere where you're thinking, I wonder if this is an issue, and you're talking to your agent, and your agent says, do you mind if I go talk to the agent for the doctor? And then they have a little agent-to-agent conversation, and they say, well, you should go in tomorrow morning, or you should go in right now, or no, it's take 2 Advil and check back with some symptoms later. And when you show up to talk to your doctor, your agent will ask you, can I give a brief to your doctor about all the conversations we had? Like, this is the thing I'd like to say about what your conditions are, and has the time to go through it with you. And that is part of where super agency becomes, because it's not just individual human agency, but it's also the agency of all of us throughout all of society. And you can play, the medical one is the clearest and easiest one to see, but you also see it in education, you also see it in legal, you also see it in, kind of just about any other kind of major work function. Now, a couple of things just to kind of tickle the gray matter on this, to give, kind of some thinking about how this is going to evolve. One of the things that will seem very strange here, doesn't seem as strange in Silicon Valley, but will be everywhere, is part of the superpowers that we're all getting is being able to do software engineering. The software engineering kind of co-pilots that are being built are accelerating at such a rate that if, for example, you wanted to do a kind of a financial analysis of energy systems around the entire world, as opposed to saying, well, okay, make sure that, person X can do that for me, and so you could do the first version yourself, right? And actually have write the program that will do all the research. And you can see some of this with the current deep research apps, which I highly recommend everyone do. And then, part of this is when you begin to think about there's AI agents everywhere, one of the things that I think is, also, it's a very complicated subject, but within some number of years, part of what will happen is when you have a kid, you'll have an AI agent for the kid, and the AI agent will go with the kid for their entire life, and will remember things and say, because you were so interested in this, would you be interested in this? Or I've looked at the entire internet, or all job opportunities, or all abilities to express your particular skills, your particular interest, and this could be interesting to you. And it could be, kind of at a, 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old when you're learning. It could be at a 30-year-old when you're navigating your career. That entire process is part of the next level of detail of what intelligence, kind of everywhere all the time, as available as water and oxygen. That's part of what that means.
It's interesting. I mean, how can Bhutan strategize to have a strategy on semiconductor industry? That was something I was working on personally for about 2 months, every time I got some time and all that. And when deep research came, it gave me in 7 minutes, 23 pages. And then the most interesting part was I was able to ask the ChatGPT to critique itself and then give me a new document on the thing. So one thing that reminds me, Reid, is that we probably will not leave jobs. AI will not take our jobs, but people who use AI will, is what I think you're alluding to. And this will be an important message for all our students here, especially to learn an AI skill. Of course, not only for students, for all of us also, actually, I would say. But maybe I do want the 30,000 feet on the energy research globally for us to diversify our energy base. But before that, Joi, maybe you can give a flavor of how do you see, the data center economy really coming to the eastern part. We see a lot of hyperscalers right now in North America, and then the expansion of 90 gigawatt of what America requires as energy in the next 5 years or so is what I was reading a couple of days ago. But how do you see that trickling towards this part of the world? Is it going to be more geopolitics? Is it going to be more dollar value? Is it going to be more, user-based, approach by the hyperscalers? Do you see more hyperscalers coming? And how can Bhutan really position?
So I don't think there's an answer to that question. I think we can talk about the different things that influence which scenarios are more likely. So Reid and I are both working on different approaches to AI that decentralize some of the pieces to have smaller models that are networked together and things like that. So how centralized the data centers have to be, and thus how centralized the energy has to be, is still kind of up for grabs on what the distribution looks like. There will always be big models being created, but how much mid-sized stuff needs to be created? And Reid used the term inference. So inference is, so if you imagine that there's a bunch of energy and data and resources that need to be created to create the first model. So that's like raising your child is the first thing. But once you have the smart model, every time you ask it a question, which is inference, you need energy. So there's energy required to serve the world, and there's energy required to create the systems. And that also depends a little bit on how big the models are going to be. And then different regions are going to be struggling for whether they need to build the big models. So I was just talking to a very wealthy European fund, and they're struggling to decide, does Europe need its own capacity of data centers and energy, because they can't depend on the Americans, or they don't want to depend on the Americans. And in this region, I talk to smaller countries who look at DeepSeek and ask it a question about their country, and it's very negative. And they say, well, we can't have a Chinese sensibility in all of our infrastructure. Just as a technical image, the way that a lot of the hyperscalers would like us to think about AI is that their models, like ChatGPT and or Gemini, are sort of general intelligence that anybody can use, but everybody should use theirs. So for cloud right now, when you put something in the cloud, you use Amazon or Google or Microsoft. And we, like in Japan, we don't try to compete with those guys. So a lot of the foundation model people would say, well, our intelligence is the same. Everyone can use our intelligence. You should just build applications. But if your basic general intelligence is negative about your country, you're not going to want to build it, especially for your government services. So the question is, what regions want to build foundation models, and how does that play out? So does it become China, US, Europe, South Asia? And then if it's South Asia, can we figure out a way to kind of pool that? So in Europe right now, there's a project to make an Airbus for AI, because if you know, like Boeing was a big American company, but Airbus was a consortium. And so the Europeans are saying, should the government and big companies gang together to compete with the hyperscalers and build their models? So one of the things I think that we're looking at the region, so I'm talking to Mongolia and Thailand and other countries who are concerned about having China being the regional hyperscaler or the regional foundation hub. And then what will happen, I think, so this is just a scenario, which probably has a less than 50% likelihood, but something that I'm exploring, is there a way for the non-Chinese Asian countries to get together to put together a power and data center hub to train? And if you look, the Arabs are trying to fund that. So you see the UAE going to places like Mongolia and say, hey, here's some money, get some solar cells, build a model. So that's one. I think the other is on the inference. So for countries like us or neighboring companies like Nepal, even if we train the model somewhere else, we need local hubs to serve them. So the inference could also be a local thing. So I think there's definitely going to be demand, and we need to be talking to everyone. But as I mentioned earlier, the chip export thing seems to be loosening up. So that opens up a whole thing. And as I think most of the people here know, we have the Bitcoin mining. And right now, Bitcoin mining, I think, is quite lucrative. But I think that the AI training will be a thing. AI training and Bitcoin mining are very adjacent. I mean, we can use the same data centers, we can use the same power, and some of the same technology. So I think doing some to get the thing, get it going while we participate in all of the global conversations, both for foundation models and model training as well as inference, I think we have a lot of opportunity. Obviously, we need connectivity, which is the other piece. But I don't know if you want to add some.
Well, on the data center side, on the power, it's 100% from Bitcoin to AI. On the data center side, it's, having a bunch of the functions of the data center is like, 90, 95%. On the network configuration inside the data center, that begins to change, but that's actually easier to do. It's less of a massive construction project. I do think that one of the things that when you begin to think about what kind of intelligence everywhere means, I think the frontier models are difficult to achieve for anything other than the largest players. Maybe an Airbus consortium, although software tends to be driven by moving fast and taking risks. Yeah.
So I think
Which
the
I was referring back
hypothesis,
to Whiplash.
I think the hypothesis is that you could do an Airbus to create a big data center, and you might not be able to get the foundation models, but I think this is something you need to confirm for me. But I think the open source models even are only about a year behind, right? So it might not be the winner take all super intelligence, but having a non-biased model that we can use for most applications might be something that you could build in an Airbus type structure, right?
Yeah, that was essentially the nuance that I was getting to, which is the software development. I do think that most areas, even though the frontier models, you'll want to allow to the Microsofts, Googles, Amazons, et cetera. But there's a whole bunch of other models that will matter. Like, for example, what we're doing in Manus is in part training some of our own models that have to do with, what will be the drug responsiveness to certain kinds of cancers in terms of how it works. And so that's not going to be an end result of the frontier model. Now, the good news is, like one of the things when you look at DeepSeek, is that in generating all these models, you don't have to train the frontier model to be a model generator. And part of like when I begin to think about like what are the kinds of things that if I were Bhutan talking to the hyperscalers that I'd say is like, look, we of course would love the capital commitments, forward purchase contracts, and a bunch of other things. But what we'd also like is an ability to do some distillation off your large models for things that most matter to us. And then when you get to the open source models, you can do post-training on them and retraining. I think we're going to see a lot more of that because the first pre-trained model will not be tuned to the thing that you think will be super important. And some of it's inference costs, but some of it's also other things. And so I think being more like a pluralism of capabilities, kind of more global diversity on this is, I think, very important. It's one of the things that the Europeans are definitely thinking about a lot. It's one of the things I think it's important to think about in various Asian contexts as well. But the way that you make it happen, you don't necessarily need to have a, kind of a, like an MIT class large facility somewhere to do that. Because actually, in fact, 10 to 20 people doing distillation, doing post-training, can create things that are very interesting and can be kind of the equivalent of sovereign assets. So for example, within the culture of here's the things that we hold dear, here's the things that we're positive about, and can navigate what is frequently thorny political issues.
What? Yeah, please.
True. So, I mean, I think we've established that the demand is there. I mean, and definitely there's the opportunity for Bhutan, given the abundant green power that we have here. I think Joi, towards the end, you kind of touched on it. Connectivity is another piece of it. Having the right regulatory environment, considering there are concerns where these models go, where these weights, ultimately even for inference, you would need to take them, right? So even though this opportunity exists for Bhutan, we still have a lot to do. Maybe on the connectivity piece as well as on the regulatory piece, if you could, both of you could add a bit.
I think one word that Reid used that maybe some people know and some people don't is the word distilling. So it used to be that, so a model, so like ChatGPT 4.5 is a model, and the model, the brain, has what are called weights, which is basically how each of the things are set. So if you copy the weights, you can copy the the training is the idea. And it used to be believed that if you could that you had to protect it so that people couldn't copy these weights. But distilling is, if you take an AI, so basically an AI is able to talk to this other AI, distilling is to be able to basically mostly steal its knowledge by just talking to it rather than copying all of its weights. And so distilling, which is what we believe DeepSeek did, we realized that just protecting with cybersecurity the brain itself, the weights, isn't enough, that people can just take the learning. Now, they're going to try to figure out ways to prevent it. It's very difficult to prevent, but I think what Reid was saying is that you actually don't need to move the whole brain. You can, as long as you have access to talk to the brain. So it's changed the way in which we think about training models, which I think has a lot of impact on what we're talking about. I think the policy around whether you're allowed to do that, like I think the Chinese government said, no, it's fine, go ahead and do that. So I think like whether you're allowed to do distilling, whether you need, how we deal with copyrighted work, medical data in Japan is terrible. It's really difficult for privacy to copy. And so I think what's interesting about Bhutan, so if you look at countries and the history of copyright even, like the Americans, when they first started, they had no publishers. So they just copied everything from from UK. And then they used that to generate their own art and their own knowledge. But then once the Americans built Disney and all these big companies, they then became protective. Well, Bhutan, we have some publishers and we have some content business, but it's not huge and scary. So I feel like what we can do in Bhutan on the policy side is create very training favorable policy that aren't bad. And most of the sort of open source and kind of training favorable policies are actually good, but the incumbent industries feel like it's stealing their money or stealing their assets. So I think there definitely is, and interestingly, that our neighbor, India, is very progressive. So the Indian copyright law allows people to copy things for education. So in the US, even if I'm a faculty member, I can't copy academic journal and give it to my student. And that's because the academic journal publishers are, to me, horrible. They're trying to charge thousands of dollars for things that should be given away for free. But in India, you can give them away for free. So they took copies of all the journals, and in India, you can copy any journal because it's for education. So we could say, for educational purposes, in Bhutan, you can train models, you can take copyrighted information, and you can share information. And the copyright law in India was very much kind of a paper-based idea, but we could do it in a much smarter way. And for example, if you do training, if you take copyrighted material and you train on it, you could also set up a filter to prevent copyrighted material from coming out the other side. So if you're a student, you can, as a metaphor, you can read anything you want, and there's no restriction. But when you say something, you have to make sure you're not copying anything. So by being kind of technically careful about where you restrict, you could start unrestricting things that are currently restricted in other countries. So I think it's a really important point. I think the two things that we need is we need to understand both where the technology is and where it's likely to go in order to make policies that are smart. And we need policymakers that understand technology and technology people that understand policy. And there aren't very many of those people. But I think if we set up a project and said we're doing it, we could probably attract the best in the world. And it gets to this kind of pull over push. I think if we, and there are very few places that can do this because we have sovereign support, we have energy, and connectivity will be key. But I think, we've been talking about this, but I think this is a really important way to get in.
Just to, I think a message is very clear for us. There's an opportunity for Bhutan with the energy we have, with the revolution in AI. There's an economics, there's a diversification of economy that we can build. And I think we're very poised with the GMC, where there's an agility for policy regulations, with brand Bhutan that we have. I think this is an amazing opportunity for us. But Reid, just to very quickly bring on, we have 36,000 gigawatt of hydropower potential. Being hydro is great, but it's one source of energy at the end. Give us a flavor of what's happening globally in the area of energy research, diversification of energy for security for Bhutan. Range of nuclear to hydrogen. What else do you think beyond hydro that we should look at in Bhutan?
Well, one of the good things about this race for getting power to fund AI is you can get a lot of forward commitments from hyperscalers. Across a number of things. They, of course, just like every business, prefer the soon, on time, deliverable there versus risk. But given the intensity of the demand, a portfolio of risk makes sense. And so part of what's been happening in the US and more broadly has been, for example, a variety of investments in nuclear power. I've made a few in fusion, mostly because my view of the primary way to really help with climate change is you get carbon sequestration at cheap enough power. And so if you have scalable power like fusion, you can then reverse a bunch of the damage that's been done, and that's a very good thing. And part of the reason why one of these investments I've done with Sam Altman, he was doing it also for AI in order to do this. And so and there's a variety of different, it's been kind of fun as mostly a software investor to be engaging in these, here's one theory of fusion, here's another theory of fusion, here's another theory of fusion. For those who don't know, fusion is what the sun produces, and no one wants, of course, to produce a sun on our Earth's surface. There's no risk of that, but it's like if you create this little tiny micro moment of fusion, it has zero radioactive risk, et cetera, and so that's one of the reasons like fusion is kind of the gold pole star in this. But there's also been a lot of interesting things in nuclear fission, smaller reactors that fail gracefully, that don't create Chernobyl or other kinds of effects and so forth. And those have been developed in Europe over time, and I think there's now a set of things. The hyperscalers are talking a lot about geothermal energy as another kind of major area. But like more or less, hydrogen, more or less all of the short answer is when you're in, like, for example, in the boardroom at Microsoft, the answer is all. like let's see if we can get this, because we don't know which one will play, but it's really important. And it's one of the things that allows, kind of the risk taking that Joi was talking about before. And then some of them will work and some of them won't work, and that's okay. And that's part of what we do as VCs.
Right. I hear geothermal, I hear fusion. I think these are the future. We are exploring a bit of geothermal in Bhutan. Fusion would be very interesting. But AI is kind of now, and there are opportunities for us now to see how we can use AI with the hydro that we have. I think that's an economy we're looking at. But very quickly, if as we transition, of course, we'll open up for audience for questions very soon. GMC is recruiting. There's a huge recruitment drive. I think the final date is on 31st of May or so, end of May. And we're looking for talent within Bhutan. Of course, we're looking for global talent for us to learn from each other and take GMC forward, take Bhutan forward. AI is now, future is maybe nuclear, maybe quantum. In relation to talent management within GMC, with the new kids, and we have a lot of kids in the audience today, students in the audience, some thoughts about how we can look at what is now for us, which is probably AI, but also what is next for us, where we don't need to be playing a catch-up game, but where Bhutan can set something slowly but surely into 2 or 3 areas that you see that Bhutan can position in talent and a future economy.
Well, as the author of a book called Blitzscaling, slowly and surely is a question for other people than me. But I do think that the importance is you try to skate to where the puck is going. This is an ice hockey metaphor. I'm not sure ice hockey is a particular Bhutanese sport. Get ahead of the cricket ball, whatever the particular the things are here. And I think that the essential question is it will be creating a lot of disruption. When you think of disruption in terms of like industries, how business model works, the connectivity is super important, is to start experimenting and start going sooner. Because a little bit like Joey's earlier comments, like we don't know exactly what it is because it's dynamic, it's evolving. It's not a known path. It's kind of like you start hiking this trek and you come around and then you say, okay, that's a possibility, this is a possibility, this is a possibility, and that's part of how you get there. Now, I think in terms of talent, one of the things that I think is a important, important around the world is one of the enormous fortunes that we have in operating in Silicon Valley is that there's a lot of talent there where we talk to each other. It's a network of people where we talk to each other constantly. And throughout my, feeling a little old, 30-plus year career doing this, I'm learning constantly from the other people that are there. One of the benefits of AI is that it's literally like, it's kind of, you get out what you put in. And it's an enormous amount of great information. Like you were talking about the using of deep research, and then you can use AI to cross-check the work. You go, well, I'm not quite sure that what you said is right. And so, matter of fact, I think we were talking about this a couple days ago, where it's like, okay, tell me what was wrong about this. And right, the answer I just gave you, let me tell you what was wrong about it, and it will do that. And that's the thing to start really getting engaged with it and thinking about, like, how do you learn? Because part of the talent is, there's enormously, this is one of the things I love about kind of elevating humanity. There's amazing talent everywhere in the world. It's part of the reason I come here, do events like this, because it's how do we unlock that talent? And one of the things that is there with AI now is it just requires some curiosity and some persistence. And part of it, like I'll mention one of the things I was mentioning Joey, you begin to learn how to do this kind of prompting in interesting ways, and you should be both kind of researching how other people are doing interesting things and also experimenting with things yourself. So, for example, one of the things that I do now very regularly is, say I wanted to create an output on something that was interesting and important, and say it was like, for example, what is the future of nuclear fusion over the next 3 to 5 years, which is definitely a good deep research prompt because it takes its agent and scours everything on the web trying to bring out the most current information in order to do that. Well, I wouldn't just sit down and write that like a search query. What I would do is I would go to ChatGPT and I would say, please write me the deep research prompt that gives me an analysis of where the future looks like for nuclear fusion in the next 3 to 5 years, what the key risks are, what the key opportunities are. Please index that against projects that we have in Bhutan and opportunities we might have here, and then write me that prompt, please. And so the thing that I just wrote, and by the way, you can do it through audio, which makes it work a lot quicker, is this. And then it will write a prompt that's this. And then you read through it and you go, well, actually this part I'll change a little bit. I'll add this. Oh, that was a good idea. I'll add this. And then you submit the whole thing. And your output's much better. Now, when you begin to think about that, not just as a research thing, but as an education thing, as a talent unlock thing. Now, I do think it's also important, networks are really important, and part of what makes Silicon Valley go is it brings amazing people from around the world. That's part of how we met, right, for that. And so, but I think it's also something that be used for helping elevate talent here too.
Right, please.
Really fascinating. The world that we live in is widely going to, it's going to be dramatically different. And it'd be very interesting, I think, for all of us here to think about how we need to be prepared, to better fit in and also be able to positively contribute. Joey, I know as the former director of the Media Lab, the MIT Media Lab, you're famous for doing things different, doing things out of the ordinary. And also, I learned that you have investment firms, and the name actually, is very interesting. It's called Neoteny, and your definition for it is retention of childlike attributes into adulthood. I'd be very interested to, if you could talk about it, and also in the context of what type of capabilities we need now.
Yeah, they're pretty related. So Neoteny so childlike attributes can be pretty physical, like a giant tadpole. But the thing that's interesting, so Disney loved the word Neoteny. And childlike attributes are wonder, curiosity, joy, and then even socializing is actually quite a childlike attribute. So the idea that you look for joy and you're constantly learning, and because generally, even with humans, as a child you learn, and then when you become an adult, you earn, protect, fight, and just you don't need to learn more. And industry in the past used to be you learn to be a farmer and then you just farmed the rest of your life. But now with everything changing, it's actually important to have this notion of wonder. And also, where does the motivation come from? So as a child, learning is the most exciting thing. But as you get older, you start to do things to be rewarded, to protect, and even normal schools, they're like, stop playing, study the thing we're trying to tell you. So you learn to do as you're told so that you get praised and get good grades and earn money. But I don't think that's necessarily working hard and doing as you're told. You don't get a Nobel Prize by doing as you're told. You get a Nobel Prize for disobeying your teachers and doing the thing that you're obsessed about, but doing it better than anybody has ever done in the history of the world. That's how you get a Nobel Prize. And I think about this a lot because Japan, we have like 30 Nobel Prizes. MIT has over 100. Because at MIT, what you do is you focus on assets. You take the thing that they're good at, and you encourage that. And you say, the other stuff, you're not good at English, don't worry. Somebody else will do that. And in most countries before AI, you wanted standardized humans so that they become bureaucrats and businessmen and factory workers and that you could replace them because they're all the same. And you just want lots of them so you could mass produce materials because everything was done by hand, whether it was accounting or building things. But now we have robots to be robots. We don't need people to do standardized things and do as they're told. And in fact, if you're just doing as you're told and you behave like a human robot, well, you're going to quickly be replaced. And what you want people to do is to be different, to have uniqueness. And also, if everybody's saying the same thing, it's only one person worth of information. But if everybody's saying something different, you have 10 people worth of information. And so the difference that makes a difference is a Gregory Bateson phrase, is what we want. We want difference, we want diversity. So diversity is not just a political statement, it's how you create more knowledge, more information, more culture. And so I think, and this ties to Reid's prompt thing, is that, an AI is only as good as what you're asking it to do. And if you're just telling it what everybody else is telling it, you're not really adding any value to the society. And the other thing that's interesting, this is not just AI, but it's technology in general. I think once we had data centers, you didn't have people setting up machines anymore. And once we created web services, you didn't have people programming everything from scratch anymore. And now you can have, like, one CTO can be the whole technology group of a startup. And now with AI, the CTO doesn't really even need to code. And so what you can do is you can do a lot more with a lot fewer people. And what Bhutan doesn't have is a lot of people. But Bhutan has a difference. It has a spirit. It has the ability to attract the best people. So I think the goal for Bhutan is for every person to try to be unique. And you can be unique because you live in an interesting place. You can be unique because you have a thing. It can be your culture. It doesn't necessarily have to be unique in that you're a math genius and go to MIT. But I think the key, and we call this in education, so now I'm the president of a university, and I'm thinking about this a lot. Deficit-based education is when you take the thing everybody's bad at. If you're bad at math, do more math. If you're bad at English, do more English. And don't do the thing you're good at. We're just trying to standardize you. The opposite is, you like math, do more math. The AI will do the English. You don't need to, you just speak Dzongkha. But because the fact is, AI will start to support the deficits. And so asset-based is trying to find the thing that you're interested in or the kid is interested in. This ties to Niyatni. What's the inner passion? What's the thing that you would do even if you didn't get paid, and do more of that, rather than, everybody has to sweep the floors, because this is, again, I've been working with kids with disabilities in Japan, and what they do is they have these companies where people with disabilities go, and some kids love to clean the floor, and some kids love to do the computer, but what they do is, well, everybody has to clean the floor, even if you don't like it, and that's fair, but it's not fair. The fair is letting people do the thing they like, and letting the kids who like the thing do the thing that you don't like, right? And so that diversity is really important, and I feel like Asian countries are not very good at that. Asian countries are, well, everybody has to do this, and I think that's a slight cultural shift that we need in order to face AI, but again, I think it allows us to pick the best people to bring to Bhutan. And then the last thing I'll say here is, you remember when we brought Keisuke Honda here, and he's one of the star soccer players in Japan. But he has this interesting thing, because he learned from all the foreign players that the Japanese brought. And back when he was starting, there were no good Japanese soccer players. But now the Japanese soccer players are world class. And he says, back in the day when I was starting, the Japanese brought them all in. But we don't have many foreign soccer players left in Japan. They've all become quite good. And so I think and this is His Majesty's Diamond thing. I think there's a phase where we're bringing in really interesting, unique foreigners to Bhutan to help unlock talent here. And I think as that talent unlocks, you start to get these super spiky, talented people in Bhutan that then generate. And I think it's a two-phase thing, but I think the key last point is that it's not about quantity, it's about the quality. And I think what we're trying to do at GMC is really to try to find things that are unique for Bhutan and then bring them in. And so people like Reid, and the great thing is I've never had anybody say, when I say, hey, you should come to Bhutan, and say, why, or not interested. I mean, almost everyone is interested in coming, and so I think that we have the one thing that's the key thing is to get people here and be excited. I don't know, you should tell us if so far, because this is Reid's first time, whether we've met your the smiley face thing.
Definitely a smiling emoji here, yeah. Definitely smiling emoji, given that the mics might have eaten that. There's a particular focus on the neoteny things. I think it's an excellent question that I want to make sure we highlight. The theory of neoteny is a theory about how human beings evolved separately, forked from primates. And the notion is that we retained our childlike characteristics, like showing up more of a blank slate, but with curiosity and all the rest. And I think it's a pretty good theory of kind of why it is that kind of the various Homo sapiens ended up kind of evolving and happening. I think it's a good thing to remember that neoteny mindset as we begin to get into the AI age. And so I think that the highlight of the question is, I think, very good. I just want to make sure we stay on that.
Right. Thank you. This is amazing. I think literally, our lives are going to change in the next 5 years, and the impact that comes to this part of the world, the research and the innovation that happens in this part of the world, I think we have become smaller and smaller from that matter. But childlike attitude, I think that's a main message for us in the last section, which is important for us. But maybe at this point we will, do you have a question before we open up? Yes.
Yeah, so still on the education bit, especially since we have a lot of students and teachers and executives looking at education. There's this whole, debate on AI and when we need to introduce it into education, whether we should ban it. And I think, Reid, I was going through one of your podcasts, and you had some, insightful views on. Obviously, you are pro-AI in education, but there are concerns that if we did it, then students might just cheat, right? But you had an interesting take that ChatGPT and AI is actually going to make exams much more, unfortunately, challenging for students. And I think while you're maybe elaborating on that, also if you can unpack what we need to do in education and how do we leverage the benefits of AI?
So obviously in the first disruptions, which is a way that teachers currently set their curriculum, teach, get their students to do homework, evaluate the homework, all of this, including how the teacher operates, not just how the student operates, is part of what we're getting disrupted. And the disruption means that if the teacher is saying, hey, I've got this way of writing an essay on the tea ceremony, and now you can simply go to ChatGPT and say, give me an essay on the tea ceremony, and that creates challenges. Now, it's a little bit like saying, we don't want calculators, we don't want books, et cetera. So it's actually beholden on changing the educational system. Doesn't mean that it's easy, doesn't mean there aren't challenges. But like, for example, say, oh, is this gonna then supplement and we as human beings are gonna become, kind of couch potatoes that don't do any thinking ourselves? Well, confronted with new tools, people both can be lazy and very curious. So some people will be lazy, some people will be curious. We want to try to get as many people to being curious and developing as possible. But when you get to educational assessment, part of where I actually see in a not large number of years, where educational assessment will all be done by interacting with an agent. And so it's like, for example, today, when we do assessment and we do oral exams, those oral exams tend to be for this very relatively small number of students who are doing PhDs or DPhils, et cetera, because it's expensive and difficult to do, and you're expected to be, completely knowledgeable across your entire set. Well, part of what I think will happen in terms of examination across everything from, 5-year-olds to, including PhDs, but the whole range, will be essentially AI agents doing oral examinations, which means you can't do the hacks that I did, for sure, as a student. It was like, oh, I know that's good. Like, I only need to study these 3 questions because at least one of those will be on the exam, and I'll write that, for example. Because you don't know what will be there, because they could ask anything and go into depth on this one and say, oh, well, you seem to understand tea ceremonies pretty well. Let's go into the history of Shintoism, right? And so, anyway, that's what I think we will be there in a very quick time.
And at our university, I'm thinking of putting in co-pilots that help you study coding, for example, and you're asking questions and it's helping you. And obviously they know exactly what you know, right? So one of the ideas that I have is to have an opt-in to say you can either take the exam or allow your co-pilot to tell us what you know. Because if you're not good at exams, well, your co-pilot knows what you know, and it knows if you know what you say you know, right? So that's one thing. And then we actually have a AI now in one of our courses so we have a course where you have to put together a business project. And we know what a business project proposal is. So it has to have, it has to meet a need, you have to have your go-to-market. And what we have is we have an AI that goes through and keeps talking to you until you've developed your whole pitch. But we have a template for what the pitch is. So it says, well, what's your go-to-market? Who are your customers? What's the price point? And it asks you questions. And the AI, even LLMs today, know whether your answer answers the questions that and then so by the time the teacher gets it, it's pretty good, right? And then the teacher, and it's readable. I was with a head of HR the other day, and I said, what's your main problem? He said, well, we've done these surveys, but people write these huge, long essays, and we take so much energy reading them. I said, well, why don't you just create an interactive AI that produces a 2,000-word output, but goes back and forth and says, is this what you meant? Is this what you meant? And helps the person refine so it doesn't end up with a 10-page illegible answer, but it's a succinct thing. Because I think AIs, as we know, are really good at helping you write. But I think, to Reid's point, if it's an oral exam, and I think a fair oral exam is one where you go back and forth, and it says, is this what you meant? Do you understand this? And then if you take that whole log, it actually gives you a pretty complete idea. And one of the things that I've noticed in our academic circles is you have really smart people doing interactions with AIs, and when you read that, it's super useful. And so the answer may be interesting, but when they send you the public link for the chat, it's super interesting, and then people can then add to that and share it. So I think conversations with AIs both expose knowledge, but it also exposes a lot of the character of the person interacting with the AI, and that could be also an evaluation thing, because I think it's going to be less and less, getting back to my original point about being original, it's going to be less and less about whether you know how to do division longhand. It's going to be, are you interesting? Are you unique? How do you approach? Do you ask good questions? And your prompts to an AI are much better judge of whether you're asking good questions or understand the problem than whether you can basically anything you can cheat is something that there's an answer to, which means it's not unique, which means it's not interesting, at least for me.
Right. Thank you. I think that's the curiosity I think we want from all of us. I think we discussed about energy, AI, economy, education, talent, past, present, future. I think we covered quite a bit of ground. And this is the time I think we should open up for questions from the audience. Dom, do we have a mic?
Thank you so much. I couldn't stop myself from speaking and exposing my ignorance because this was too intriguing. I'm Pinso Namgyal. I work for Department of Geology and Mines. I have a couple of questions. Maybe I'll restrict to maybe 2 or 3. One is related to my field of work. When you talk about energy, you know, your point to intelligence getting as cheap as energy. So sorry to paraphrase your word, but you know, maybe I understood it correctly. But energy is dependent on something else also. You know, if fusion is available, readily available, and easily available to all of us, that wouldn't be a problem. But you know, till such time, be it renewable or non-renewable, what are your thoughts on the missing piece? You know, for instance, if you have to make a solar plant, you have to mine silicon. You know, if you have to build a wind turbine, it's basically tungsten or graphite. What do you think about sustainability along those lines? And if you have to have an AI system, it's basically built on REE, rare earth elements. So what are your thoughts on that? And is it finite, infinite? Nothing to me is a unlimited resource. So till you reach that fusion again. So that I thought was a missing piece in your talk. So I would love to hear on that. And a little bit along the lines of, you also mentioned on printing press and cart and horses and so on and so forth, which are brilliant invention of the world. Of course, AI is a different matter, a different animal altogether. Because printing press cannot think for itself, maybe. You know, it will not decide when to print. I don't know, if AI could, you know, reach a certain point, you train so much, AI is everywhere, and you train to the extent that it can think for itself, and who should be the center of the universe, I mean world? Human beings or artificial intelligence or natural intelligence? So those are a few things I would like to, you know, ask your expert views on. And also coming to the originality in thinking. You know, the other day I was having a very interesting conversation with my son. He's a young boy studying in class 10. You know, the things he was talking to me is, you know, it goes even beyond my head. I'm a 45-year-old man. He's just 15-year-old. And I was reflecting, is it really he talking? Or did he see it on, you know, so many platforms, ChatGPT? I don't know. So what are your thoughts on that? And also maybe finally, maybe I'm asking too many questions. Maybe I'll save it for later. Thank you so much.
Well, a range of questions. First on energy stuff, I mean, Ujjwal, you may want to answer some of these because you have a much deeper expertise on some of this than I do. But you know, I do think that you know, there's a set of different, you know, kind of things that go into the creation of data centers, rare earths, et cetera. There's a set of questions around how do you build wind turbines. I do think that when I get to this kind of science acceleration that I was talking about with AI, that will actually create a lot of interesting new materials, whether it's, you know, semiconductors to, you know, maybe, you know, some kind of very easily printable or carbon manufacturable, you know, less rare and expensive things for turbines and other kinds of things. I don't think it's science fiction, although the exact shape of what when is hard to predict exactly, and that's part of the reason why to have multiple efforts. But I do think that you know, part of the, you know, already we kind of have, we see a world where there's infinite demand for electricity at a certain price, especially if it's green. And part of what will be increasing that demand is use of intelligence in kind of everywhere, as I was talking about, but we can also use some of that intelligence to try to make the use of the energy more efficient. Anyway, so that's, like I said, this is not my area of deep expertise, and I will defer to you on the rest of that question.
Thanks, Reid. I think one of the things that you mentioned about material science and exponential growth in material science might be very interesting. Even if you look at artificial or dolomite or artificial graphite, that we have synthetic dolomite and graphites that is being developed. I think these kind of research can really go exponential. And then I think it does have a network effect or a cyclic effect. As energy becomes cheaper and cheaper with AI, even space exploration of mining minerals might become a commercially viable aspect. So as we find more materials with AI, we may lower the cost of energy, and as that happens, maybe even mining in space may be a potential to even make more exponential growth in the energy sector without mining the rare earth elements. But yeah, these are some of the quick thoughts I thought.
Yeah, and none of that, part of the point of your question, which I think is very good, is to say there's a lot of things we're working towards, but there's a lot of needs immediately, and navigating that is one of our challenges. We do have, this technology is the most cognitive of all technologies we've created, and where it ends up going is, I think, a very interesting philosophical conversation. And people go out and articulate opinions about this in a lot of different ways. Some people say, no, it's only going to be a tool. And some people go, hey, it's going to be the new superintelligence. And some people with the new superintelligence like, and it's going to be like this robot that's going to take over, and humanity's going to end. Or it's going to be, oh no, it's going to be superintelligence and we're going to invent fusion with it. And you get the whole range of these conversations. And the short answer is not to be kind of iterating and looking, because, I could easily tell a universe where, 20 years from now, what we've got with AI is these amazing savants that are these agent companions that we navigate our life, but there are things that where in symbiosis works actually really well, and a little bit like the asset base versus deficit of kind of how things improve. That's a very strong possibility. And then there's also a set of things where AI will probably be much better than us at some cognitive tasks that is just simply, it's like, for example, if a human says, I want to play chess too, it's like, well, okay, that's nice. You can do that too. And there will be some that will be like that. But the figuring out how we steer it and how we are involved in it is a dynamic process. And I think that the reason that I tend to, very strongly encourage people from the educational answers that I gave earlier and everything else is to just get in it and learning, because it's very easy to think because you can tell a narrative story, superintelligence is this thing that helps elevate humanity, superintelligence is this thing that challenges humanity. I can tell you both stories. We are storytelling creatures. And those stories can delude us because we tell what sounds like a very coherent story, and then it doesn't actually do it. And so getting in it and seeing it. And so, and people, naturally, most people have this kind of reaction about, oh, I don't know if I should use it. Maybe it's using copywritten materials. And he's like, no, you should use it. You should get familiar with it. And that's part of what the future of originality or creativity, or this question around, for example, Ujjwal gestured at, space mining. I think that's almost for sure we're going to have space mining with robots. I think space mining with human beings doing it, I think, is a lot of challenge that we just would prefer to have the robots do. But that is an opportunity that gets opened up.
Any more questions? Sure. Maybe after that.
Leslie, thank you. My name is Distilling. I'm working with the GovTech Bhutan. When we are talking about the energy, and I think there was we were talking about the need for energy, huge need for energy, especially when it comes to green energy. But then at the same time, we are also wasting a lot of, wasting a lot of energy trying to mine blockchains, right? Because basically, while the value in blockchain is there, but then the outcome of the energy that is being actually used to actually mine those blockchains are basically just trying to see a hash where certain number of zeros are there or not. So maybe I know that there are a few kind of conversations going on regarding proof of stake, proof of work and all these things, but then proof of work is still the most used when it comes to blockchain. So what's your thoughts, maybe both of you, what's your thoughts on maybe taking that one to proof of not really work, but then maybe try to use that energy to actually to be diverted to the training of AI as well?
Well, I'll start, but then pass it over to Joey. I do think that various folks, His Majesty, others, have been smart about deploying a bunch of the hydropower and mining Bitcoin, because I think it creates a economic asset. I myself am a holder of a bunch of Bitcoin. I think it's a useful addition into the world in terms of how, it's like evolving the entire internet protocol in ways that are very useful. But as Joey gestured at earlier, and this will be where I hand it over, I anticipate that it's like you're building the infrastructure while getting the economics from the Bitcoin side, but then you will deploy that infrastructure within, AI and other software, kind of more data center things, because, the mining of Bitcoin is a temporal thing, not an infinite ongoing thing. And with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously evolving, and I think while Bitcoin and energy use and proof of work is still the largest, I think most of the substantial things that could move to proof of stake have moved to proof of stake. And I think that what we're looking at with Bitcoin is it's the most mature source code, it's the most robust from a security perspective, and proof of work with energy is wasteful, but it's the most, so Bitcoin tries to stay as simple as possible to stay as secure as possible. So the reason people put their money in Bitcoin is I think it has the least likelihood of failure at a technical and economic system, and everything else has other vectors of attack. So I think it's able to sustain more inertia for attack. And there are really interesting ideas like using AI and using other things so that you get a dual use and things like that. And I think we'll start to see many, many blockchains coming out. But about Bitcoin being kind of the ultimate solution, I think it's going to be very difficult to find contenders. And then judging whether it's good or bad, it's a very good question. I mean, I think because it uses energy, and energy is so important, it's also what makes it so robust, And so I say it's kind of it's difficult to judge because it's just a fact of what Bitcoin is, and some people will always use it. And I think the fact that we're using renewable energy makes our Bitcoin greener. I think that at GMC and GIDC and DHI, we're using all the other tokens. We're using different tokens for different things. So for instance, we're not using Bitcoin blockchain for the national ID. We're not going to be using it for high-speed transactions. It's really for the particular store of value that Bitcoin represents. And I think just kind of like scientifically, it's going to be difficult to disrupt its current proof of work. And yeah, I don't know if anybody has any other views. I mean, it's difficult to judge it. Yeah.
Just want to add very quickly, on lines of what Joey is saying. I think it really brings security to the asset. I think that's one thing. Like the way we spend energy to mine gold, we are spending energy to bring security to Bitcoin, or we spend energy or resources to print a dollar or a neutrum. We are spending energy to bring that Bitcoin, and then hence it makes it secure. I mean, if there is an alternate to make it as secure without spending that energy, it's great. But otherwise, I think it's really bringing security to the asset of Bitcoin where we are spending the energy. And
I think another way of thinking about it is energy is the ultimate fungible asset. It's the thing that everything needs, whether you're a plant or you're a human being. And so it kind of is natural that anything useful requires some energy, even creating information, right? So I think that something is linked to there at its basic form is important. And I do think that there are ways to structure creation of value that don't require as much energy. But then what you do is you start to increase dependencies on other things that create some sort of fragility. So, but making it more secure with less energy is, I think, something we could work on. Yeah.
Did you have a quick comment?
Just wanted to add also that, I mean, to the question, I think particularly with regard to Bitcoin, definitely the amount of value that we can mine out of it is going to reduce over time. But there's still going to be the impact of, the inflation related to fiat and the transaction fees that the network will continue to, give out, right, in terms of Bitcoin itself, which will still add value, I think, over time. Obviously, maybe the number of nodes are going to reduce over time. And I think also from a philosophical point of view, what do we call money? What do we value? I think it's all a creation of us, right? I mean, we actually think that gold is valuable because it's scarce and because we are able to transact with it, right? This is a new creation. The value that it adds is that we can easily transact with it, and it has a very significant capability in storing value. So, just a different way of thinking about it as well.
Right, thank you. I think there was a question here.
Hi, my name is Karma. I am an insurance man. We talked a lot about energy because energy seems to be the center of everything. And now, given that energy has to be used for AI, the value addition from the AI, the total product from AI, will that compensate for the rest of the economy? If not, how do we make up the rest of the economy for the energy that has been used for AI?
I think a return on the use of energy in AI.
So, this is where the kind of comments that I was making earlier. If you, for example, you say, just as one tangible example is, we know from how to, on current AI, how to make a medical assistant that could run 24/7, available to any smartphone at under $5 an hour. And that medical assistant is probably, within a very short time, better than your average doctor GP. Doesn't mean that they can't be worked together. And so when you begin to think about what are the returns, if you said that that was available, that return is almost infinite when you consider the well-being of human health and everything else. And that's just medical. That's not education. That's not, for example, you mentioned insurance. Obviously doing analysis of what risks are and pricing that appropriately. That's all of this is what intelligence everywhere, kind of enables. And I think that it's part of the reason why, literally every single, company in Silicon Valley is moving fast at this, is because they think that's what the future is. And, I happen to agree.
Any other questions? Yes, please. 1, 2, 3. Maybe we can take two questions at a time.
My name is Ugen. I'm from insurance. I have two questions. First one being the security, and the second one on the hyperscaler. So first one, security, I think, as a curious mindset, we all are, more into the ChatGPT rather than the Google search engine. So what I've really seen is that, how fascinating, it is to get a result quickly, and then, sometimes it can be very specific. And that, what I have really noticed is that, people tend to, get addicted or, tend to feed too many data that, they get fascinated, and then, the hours it spends and gets the quick output, that I feel, security is overlooked in that. So in that, what I really notice is that in most AI sessions, the security or the cautionary measure is not mentioned. Prompt engineering is fascinating, but what should we really put in that prompt? Should we really put the sensitive informations, or should we mask or falsify that important figures? That I think is mostly not mentioned. So I think in that way, most people will tend to feed more and more sensitive data. Let's take example DeepSeek. There is a data breach on that. So we are exposing our sensitive data, and then tends to show that ChatGPT knows more about our country than we do. So in that, that is one concern. And second, on the hyperscaler, having LLMs and training them, instead of, how about just opinion, how about small nations organizing and making a data center, and building, resources which takes ample of time and durations, and then resources, manpower, in which Bhutan do not have that one. And why we do not leverage those hyperscalers such as Amazon that have already the bedrock and the data lake and the queue, where we can use those technology to get the output as and when we require. That's all.
Thank you. Reid, do you want to go quick?
Just ask a clarifying thing. The last thing that you were saying, like us train our own models versus, are you basically saying using the Amazon cloud to train our models there? Is that what you mean?
Because they have the readily available resources which we can pay as you
Yeah, yeah.
So I tend to think using public cloud is a very good idea. I think that's, I don't think there's any reason not to do that. And part of what Joi was mentioning is that, for example, in the Airbus, getting a consortium for the set of things that might matter for any particular country or culture or industry, that you get a kind of a collaboration and not only be dependent upon the hyperscalers. So you may be training on hyperscaler clouds because there's ending up being more of them. Now, in terms of sensitive data, it obviously is, here and there's like important things. Like if you said, well, I've got this, extremely confidential, kind of plan or information or something, and I don't know what the data security of company X that I'm using is. It's good to be cautious about that. Now, part of the reason why there's a number of companies that provide AI models, Google, Microsoft, others who, if they suck at data security, then, there's always an ability to get better, but that's, you can't say, I have to wait to 100%, because if you said, well, then don't only put it on your computer, air gap it, never put it on the internet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So frequently that concern is more distracting from the much more important issue, which is learning how to use it and being engaged with it. And so my general advice to everybody is unless you're absolutely certain that this is a big risk to be doing it, to be experimenting and trying.
Yeah, and I guess that from a cybersecurity perspective, I would say there's two separate things. There's one which is putting your Bhutan secrets on a Chinese server, regardless if it's of AI, has certain risks. And so if you're sending everything to DeepSeek, that information could be copied. But I think the risk of your personal information getting trained into a foundation model and then being regurgitated somewhere by accident is quite low, because the training trains on so much data, and there's no incentive for the training model to try to learn your personal information. And I think you really need to look at incentives. So is China incentivized to collect information about its enemies? Yes. Is there probably some way that any information that we send, so this happens for Japanese now a lot, is a lot of our offshoring of data entry, whether it's China or other places, creates holes. So there's which was the company that recently got hit? There was recently a company where the offshore data entry was hacked. I can't remember who it was. Coinbase, right. So the KYC, where you send your photo and you do the video conference, you're sending a lot of private information, and they basically bribed their way into one of those service providers and then stole a bunch of personal information. So those kinds of like traditional, good old-fashioned cybersecurity has existed before and exists in a very similar way with the AIs. The fact that your confidential information gets trained and ChatGPT starts saying confidential things is very unlikely, because there's very little incentive, and the technology isn't really built that way, is kind of one thing I would say. So I'm not that careful about what I tell ChatGPT, because I'm not that worried, especially things like medical data. Doing it here and versus in the cloud, I think generally that's true. I mean, I think all of the experimental things and training general models you would do in the cloud, but there are certain types of innovation and certain types of performance that you get when you have your own thing. And so if you look at DeepSeek, for example, they had a core team that were really optimizing the firmware and the hardware. And originally they had a team that knew how to operate and efficiently run data centers for more of the quant trading things. And they used that to use a smaller footprint of hardware to really eke out a lot of performance and also figure out how to train. And even in Japan, we have engineering going on at various layers of the stack that some of it you can't do unless you control the data center. But I think it should be a combination of both. But also, it's easier to negotiate if you have the ability to do it yourself. And so I think that having that, and then you might do some parts in the cloud and do some things. And again, I see Vincenzo there, but talking about private information, I mean, like his company, what you do, and Google, I think, allows that too, but you can put a hardware encryption key in the data center and encrypt certain parts of the data and connect with public data outside. So also having, for privacy reasons, having a whole set of things that you train internally and maybe only sending the model out versus sending the data out. So there's other reasons why you might want to have self-sovereign data centers.
Right.
Just to add also, I mean, especially for Bhutan, one of our challenges is that we do not have a lot of redundancy in terms of our internet connectivity. And the risk for us is that if we have everything on the cloud and one of those connections go down, then availability of service for our citizens is going to be impacted. So that's one of key reasons why we also are not thinking about completely using public cloud. Yeah.
Understand. I think I saw 3 hands. Maybe we'll take the questions. Students are there, so we'll take 1, 2, and then Audrey will come back to you. Yes. Yeah, maybe we can take the questions together.
Good morning, La. I'm Uken Dintup. I'm a student and a founder of AI startup called NoMind. So I have a couple of questions to ask. First of all, I want to ask to Mr. Reid. There's a very famous saying that whenever OpenAI release and feature, hundreds of GPT wrappers startup dies. But on the other hand, we can see like GPT wrappers like Cursor AI, Perplexity doing very well. So I would like to ask for advice whether it is really worth it to build AI agent or AI tool on top of GPT, or we should focus something deeper like building foundational model or infrastructure. And the second advice would be, what advice would you give to stand out against the big tech companies in this very dense market? And third question would be, last month, what's the common mistake that you have seen in AI startup founders, and how can we avoid it? Thank you.
Sure, we'll take the next question also together. Somebody had a hand raised at the back. Yes, please.
I'm Prajwal Gurung, and I'm a computer science student from Gilpushing College of Information and Technology. And I have a statement, and I would like your take on that. It's regarding AI. AI can efficiently increase and help us in completing certain handful tasks. But what I feel is that AI also reduces the human efforts to learn and to accomplish the way to complete those certain tasks, like the way to solve those tasks. For example, like in terms of calculator, we know how to solve those complex mathematical equations, but we use calculator to be more efficient on time and effort. But in terms of AI, what AI does is it actually thinks and solves the problem in their way for us. So it kind of makes the standards of human capabilities in solving complex problems, it reduces that standards of human capabilities. So I would like, what's your take on that? Because if that's the way how AI will impact our daily life, I think that the education system will also will be more efficient if they would teach students how to use AI more efficient rather than teaching them how to solve the problem itself. So what's your take on that?
Thank you.
All right, so I think on the last one, I do think that the part of what AI is already going to give us is there's many different kinds of learning. Some people learn through audio, some people learn from reading, some people learn from visual, some people learn from discussion. AI can help with all of those, so I think it will be actually increasing our kind of learning capabilities. On the GPT wrapper question, I think that the thing is to not have your only differentiator that you're a wrapper on a GPT. As new models come out and all the rest, this like the original classic on this was we're just using GPT, I think it was 3 to provide copywriting, and that's our whole business. Then when GPT-4 comes out, it's like the whole business kind of goes away, but there's a lot of different things that lead to a business. You might have enterprise integration, you might have network effects, you might have additional things that you're bringing along with the GPT and so forth. So I think there are a bunch of businesses that can be done with GPT wrappers, and I think foundational models can be much more expensive and risky and challenging, not to say not doing them. And then on small tech and big tech, all companies can more or less only do a small number of things. So, you know what Microsoft, Google, Amazon will be doing broadly. And it's like, well, your ability to move fast, take risks, establish a business thing, that's part of what startups, I'm continuing to invest in startups within Silicon Valley. And then, I think that the question around AI startups is, I'd say the principal question that probably people, if you're thinking on a global basis, which is, this is one of the things that the Silicon Valley perspective teaches us all to do, because like when we launch a company in Silicon Valley, we're not just thinking of Silicon Valley or the US, we're thinking globally, which I highly recommend. It's to be thinking about like, okay, how many other people are going to be doing this? Do I have a really interesting, rare go-to-market or interesting, rare product? So for example, I've been pitched on so many different software coding assistants, I've lost track of the number that I've been pitched on. So it's like okay, so what's the particular way you're thinking about? Those would be quick answers.
Yeah, please.
Can we get you to ask the Bhutanese some questions? If you have any. Well, I think we do that before we do maybe do that and then finish with the last question. That was.
Well, I can ask. The questions that I would start with are actually probably pretty deep and probably difficult in the time we have, which is, if you were thinking about like part of when we're training these models, we're trying to train them also to a certain kind of value system. And I think one of the things that's really awesome about Bhutan is that value system. And so how do you make that value system present for the human reinforcement learning and all the rest that goes into these systems? That's one. And then, kind of another one is thinking about like, all right, if in the fact that actually I think we are made better by having a diversity, it's related to the first one, but a diversity of different kinds of cognitively trained agents. There's not, part of what we're going to be seeing is that there's going to be lots of different agents doing different things, and when you're doing distillation, it isn't the same strength as the frontier model, but it's really good at some things, and so you're going to have a pantheon, a multiplicity, a plurality of lots of different agents. What would be the agents that some emerging out of the Bhutanese ecosystem that would be particularly important to get into the whole world? Those would be small questions to and I do want to get to the last question.
Do you want me to? I mean, Reid, I think we require an evening dinner on these philosophical thoughts. But I think something that comes to my mind, especially when you talk about value systems, is, and this is something we thought about a couple of years ago, how can Bhutan position in the age of AI? What can we contribute? We will not have thousands of coders. We will not have thousands of data to support the training. But then probably when we look at our value systems in Bhutan, through the lens of GNH, how could we use in ethics of AI, in modeling the ethics of AI, the people who are sitting at the back of the computer and building the models or the mathematical model and training the models, and how these models behave at the end and how they start communicating with each other, could we embed, I mean theoretically, just speaking very openly, could we embed some level of GNH concepts in terms of how these models will behave, so that it is not completely biased into an economic modeling, it's not completely biased into certain optimizing functions, but it is cognizant, if I may say cognizant or conscious, to really bring in the different parameters that the philosophy of GNH embodies. I call it a philosophy in a way, because the governance, whether you're looking at a project or investments or running a government or running yourself as an individual, we can look at through the lens of GNH. How could that be a part of conversation in ethics of AI and modeling AI? Was something that I always thought would be interesting to bring into the equation for Bhutan to contribute. Right? I know, Jimmy, you want to add something?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, just going off with this, the GNH thing, which is a much bigger metric, you know, to measure human progress and human flourishing. And the fact that majority of the large language models right now are trained off of data out of the internet, which I think there is a bit of, you know, focus on profits and you know.
It's not a happy place.
Yeah, I think it's a place where we started. You know, not an ideal place, which perfectly measures development and growth, right? I think Bhutan, our development philosophy goes beyond just the economics. Economics and financial profits are important, but it's not everything. And I think, Joi, in your dissertation, you mentioned something as well, that there is a need for us to be looking at a higher ideal of development. And I think Bhutan gives us also the opportunity, now that we are actually looking at different modes of AI interaction, and also the possibility to generate data, right, with just using the data that we can start off with in Bhutan. So just wanted to add that. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, yes, of course. Audrey. Yes, please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Audrey. I'm an educator, and I actually run a college. I have 400 computer science students, very hungry students. Now, before I actually ask my question, may I just answer, Mr. Reid, your second point on what exactly that Bhutan need, the kind of AI and the data sets, right? So this is really a personal opinion, because if you looked at the history of the business operations in Bhutan, a lot of work is actually done on traditional paper. So one of the things that I think we really need to look at training would be RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generative Intelligence. It's something that we are doing actually in our campus here. And if you look at all the data that they have in the past, it's also in Zonga, right? So if you want to translate this information to make meaningful insights, because it's garbage in, garbage out, right? A lot of work will need to be done on RAG, right? Now for my question, right? Firstly, thank you so much for the meaningful insights. I've picked up two things. First is that thank you for letting us know that humans would actually pay a premium for green energy, right? And the second point is a very interesting conversation on risk, which is greater than safety. But if I might say a hard facts, right? Because I have a lot of hungry entrepreneur students on my campus. We're doing amazing computer science projects, but the hard facts is often ideas are undermined by structure, right? I think that's a true fact. If today we want to build, we have GDP, we have GNH, we are trying to look at gross national entrepreneurship, because this is a new avenue, right, in a sense for the young youth, right, that's coming up in the field of technology. So my question is, if I may deviate a little bit from energy and AI, and the truth is, before energy, you need to have ideas as well, right? So because we have so many ideas, we have a lot of hungry students, how do we build that ecosystem for gross national entrepreneurship, where, for example, like Reid and even Mr. Joi Ito, where you invest in startups, right? So how do we do this in Bhutan, a very small country in the Himalayas, and so that for the younger generation, the ideas will not be undermined by structure, but rather we can look at the conversation on risk greater than safety. Thank you.
I can start and kind of tie it to why Reid is here. So I don't know if it's a little bit of a tangent, but it used to be that all of the best surfers came from only a few beaches, because to be really good at surfing, you had to have a very good mentor. And then there was a moment where it broke, when suddenly you had amazing surfers coming out of unknown beaches, and it was when YouTube started to have people posting surfing videos, and they could watch the videos and they could learn. And I think entrepreneurship and a lot of skills require really good mentorship. So you can have all the energy in the world and you can have a great idea, but if you haven't had a good mentor, your likelihood of success is quite low. And also a VC. If you've never worked with professional VCs, your ability to understand how to invest or get other people to also invest is quite low. There's a lot of skill, and it's kind of there's an art is one, and then the other part is the network. So when I tell Reid, hey, I've got a company, I need other investors, and he's worked with me, and he knows somebody else. So investors are a lot of network and a lot of brand. So there's a combination. There's some stuff you can learn online, like the surfing part, which is where you can get the ideas, you can learn the skills, and most of your kids can probably get world class in doing the coding and the skill. But the last part, which is the network and fundraising, you need a network, but you don't need, and this gets back to Honda Keisuke and the soccer. You don't need to bring in 1,000 people, but you need to have a few people here who can coach your students, but just as importantly, to coach other VCs, because you need local VCs who understand how to evaluate risk and how to take risk, and you need more than one, because you need several people to do deals and to work together. And there's a global network of these VCs. But it's kind of a chicken and egg, because to get Reid to come more than once, it has to be interesting for him too. And so I think there's this kind of back and forth. And I wanted to toss it to Reid a little bit, because you've done these in the past. Like you've taken the UK and unlocked it and made it a vibrant ecosystem. And it was not a single thing, right? You did it over a period of years. And so like how would you imagine, and is Bhutan big enough to have an ecosystem by itself?
Bhutan's probably not big enough to have an ecosystem only for itself within at least global software entrepreneurship. But the network is the point to really emphasize. And part of why so many, like for example, if you look at Silicon Valley, there's like in the entire Silicon Valley, and this is not entrepreneurs, and I like the notion of gross national entrepreneurship, the entire area is 3.5 million people. It's kind of size of Ireland, 5 times the size of Bhutan. That's not the tech people, that's everybody. And yet, out of Silicon Valley comes over half of the NASDAQ value. And so you don't have to get very large in terms of population side, in order to really do some extraordinary global things. But what you do need is a really intense learning network. Some of it is the question of, who can I talk to and all the rest. But for example, when you get to entrepreneurship, there's a whole set of different problems you're solving. It's not just, I have an idea for a product. There's a lot of ideas for products. There's, how does it go to market? How does it get financed? What's the business model on it? How does it play to all the other things that are going on? What's the trend of it? When you're playing across the skills of initially developing it, growing it, there's just tons and tons of things. And the network in Silicon Valley is part of what allows Silicon Valley to do this. And there are some good books on kind of why Silicon Valley outstripped Boston, because venture capital in the US was kind of invented in Boston, and yet within software entrepreneurship, Boston is a distant eighth or something within Silicon Valley, within the US, where Silicon Valley is number one. And so it's the network access, and that doesn't, it's helpful to be geolocated, but not absolutely essential.
Right. But what's the recommendation?
42. I mean, the recommendation is to build networks.
Just add, obviously biased, right? But just wanted to put it out there. Joi, I think we touched on, the regulation bit, right? And I think maybe something to consider, Reid, is Bhutan is small, and I think one of our advantages are that there is a possibility for us to be agile. I think one of our delays in adopting regulation has given us possibly the opportunity to think about regulation that is much more current, and thereby, because technology is changing the world that we live in, maybe the opportunity to really push the boundaries in terms of how we can work safely with technology and look at proof of concepts and other things.
Maybe we can also have a last sentence and last word that you want to have as you delve on his Jigme's question from both of you.
I think it's too early to do much in the way of regulation when it comes to AI. We just don't know. So I encourage people who are thinking about regulation to think about what are the things that we should be measuring as kind of going up or down, that you say, well, I worry about, like, for example, AI causing people to not do their own work. Like, okay, well, if you're really worried about that, what do we measure in order to do that? And then what are the interventions we take to change it along the way? And so, my closing comment will be, not surprisingly, very parallel to my open comment, which is, I highly recommend that you go experiment and keep experimenting. And if you haven't found a way to make AI useful to you, you haven't tried hard enough.
Joi.
And I think I'll just go back to the regulation thing. I mean, I think like Oro Bank is an interesting example because it's, I think, one of the only really functioning full reserve banks. And they tried to do that in Silicon Valley, but nobody would let them, none of the central banks would take their money, so they couldn't do it. But here we have the government and the central bank is helping Oro Bank put their money into other countries' central banks. And I think the fact that we have entrepreneurs, students, and cabinet secretaries all in the same room talking about something is a huge advantage. And the fact that you have people who support the government, and you have His Highness who's uses technology every day and is forward-thinking. And so I think obviously there's stuff to do in AI, but I think Bhutan is quite unique, and having cabinet ministries working with entrepreneurs is quite rare. I mean, there are countries our size, and so I think there are many other things, and I do think around crypto, especially because it's so political in other countries, the combination of crypto, AI, and energy, there has to be interesting things that we can experiment with that other places can't do. And as I mentioned before, I think the stuff around copyright and medicine could be another area. And I know that in the GMC we've been thinking about medicine. So I think we should continue to experiment. And I think the key is to have everyone, all the stakeholders in the conversation, so that people understand why we're doing it. Example is in Japan. I think people, because of the privacy regulations, we can't do any studies on people. And individuals in Japan are generally very public oriented. They sacrifice themselves for the public. But because of all the bureaucracy, it's set up, we're protecting everyone's rights to the expense of public health, right? And I think if you have a small group, you can talk about it and say, well, if we take away this right, it unlocks this public thing. Why don't we do it? And I think that kind of conversation we can have here that we can't in other places.
Thank you. It's been an amazing 2 hours, 32 minutes. And in the age of TikTok and age of quick reels, I think this has been an amazing conversation, and the attention. There hasn't been any dip in energy from the panel side and, of course, from the audience side. So it's been an amazing 2.5 hours. I enjoyed thoroughly talking to such esteemed guests, Reid and Joi. Thank you so much, and thank you, Jigme. And I think all I would want to say, definitely I'm not going to summarize this 2.5 hours for us, but I think AI, energy, and
By the way,
economy.
ChatGPT could.
If you had, I'm sure we can do that, absolutely. But I think one takeaway for us definitely is AI, energy, and economics for Bhutan is a reality. It is happening now, but we also look for the future, and surely, but we will be moving into the future with vision of His Majesty in GMC and the brand Bhutan that we have together, and we look forward to your support always. But thank you everyone for making this event successful. Thank you so much.